for October 26th. It did into order, and the time is 6:30. Could we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Chafe indicated that she is running a little late, or would be a little late today. Commissioner Henme.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez.
Here.
Commissioner Ming.
Here.
Commissioner Wax.
Here.
Vice Chair Dram indicated he'd be absent today, and Chair Gizzoni.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, the first item is Commission Matters, consideration of Planning Commission meeting schedule for 2024. Is that something we need to bring up and review, or has everybody had a chance to take a look at that? So are we looking at just a motion to approve it?
Excuse me, are we talking about the schedule?
Yes.
Yes. We are looking for a motion to approve. This is a standard schedule for the commission for the next year. As you know, the commission meets every fourth Thursday, except in November and December, where the two meetings are combined into one, and we meet in December, the second Thursday in December. So if there are no further questions, we are looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Seconded.
On the motion by Commissioner Henme, seconded by Jordan Wax to approve the schedule, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Chafe is absent. Commissioner Henme?
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Ming?
Aye.
Commissioner Wax?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dram is absent, and Chair Gizzoni.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought it was on. Okay, now we have public comment for anybody who is here. A comment is limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody here for public comment? No? Anybody online or speaker cards?
I see no raised hands, and we have no speaker cards.
Okay, that ends public comment for the section for public comment for items not in the agenda tonight. Now we can move on to approval of action minutes for September 28th.
So moved.
Okay, do we have a
Seconded.
second? Okay.
Thank you. On the motion by Commissioner Henme, seconded by Commissioner Wax to approve the September 28th, 2023 minutes. Commissioner Chafe is absent. Commissioner Henme?
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez?
Aye.
Commissioner Ming?
Aye.
Commissioner Wax?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dram is absent, and Chair Gizzoni.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, now we have the next item is the Community Development Director's report. Do you have anything for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair. Little brief recap of the City Council actions over the last month since you last met. On October 3rd, the City Council proclaimed October as National Arts and Humanities Month in Emeryville. The Council also received an annual report from the Alameda County Fire Department, and the Council adopted the first reading of an ordinance to decriminalize many sections of the municipal code. That's an effort that's been underway for several years. Future agenda item request was made by Mayor Bowders and approved by the City Council to evaluate limitations on certain auto-oriented land uses, including gas stations, auto repair shops, dealerships, and public storage facilities. This is scheduled for a study session by the City Council tentatively in late December, and obviously, as this is a land use policy, this commission will be hearing more about this in the future. On October 17th, the City Council held a study session on protecting pollinators. The results of that study session was direction to staff to develop ordinances that ban neonicotinoids. I have worked really hard to say that, and I still can't do it. and rodenticides on city-owned properties and banning their use through city contracts. To create a wildflower planting program that would provide residents with free wildflower seeds, and amendment of the municipal code nuisance provisions to expressly allow wildflower gardens, and then finally to ban the planting of grass for new residential developments. So again, that's something you will hear more about in the coming months, as some of these have implications for development regulations. Finally, the council approved the annual purchase award out of the art exhibition and adopted the active transportation plan, a major milestone that you all just saw and approved at your last meeting. In terms of events, of course, there was the annual celebration of the arts exhibition on October 6th, was absolutely fantastic, held at the public market. Coming up, just this Saturday, actually, the 28th, from 11 to 5 at Huichin Park. The Harvest Festival is going on, big event. And there's a not-to-miss display, I've heard, planned by the Public Works Department celebrating their electrification initiatives that is something to see. And there's also a dunk tank. So do with that information what you will. The ECDC's annual holiday parade is on Halloween. Their Halloween parade, it'll commence at ECDC and run along Hollis, ending here at City Hall. At about 2 p.m. is when they leave ECDC, so the kids will be in their costumes. And then finally, I sent you all an invite. You all have been invited as planning commissioners to the ribbon cutting for Flores, opening at Bay Street on Friday, November 3rd at noon. And I hope that some of you can make it. Yeah. And that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. That's a lot of things, and the park opening is really beautiful, so it really looks nice, and seems to be popular already. So, okay, now we move on to disclosure of ex parte communications and identification of any conflicts of interest. Does anybody have either of those things to report? Yes, Commissioner Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will have to recuse from item 8.1, the Promenade Center Retail Mixed-Use Project, because I live within 1,000 feet, and I'll just identify my APN at the opening of the item.
Okay, anything else? Okay, with that, we will move on to public hearings. And the first item is Promenade Center for Retail Mixed-Use Project. And I believe, Commissioner Martinez, now you get to state your APN.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm recused from this item, and my APN is within 1,000 feet of this project, and it is 4910811. Thank you, and I'll just move to the audience until we're done.
Okay, thank you. And now I believe if there's a staff presentation.
Uh-oh. Sorry, it looks like it's frozen here. Give me 1 second. Okay, there we go. All right. Good evening, Commissioners. I'll be presenting today on the Promenade Center Retail Mixed-Use Project. This is an amendment to an existing planned unit development and preliminary design plan. It's located approximately between Park Avenue, San Pablo Avenue, 45th Street, and Joseph Emery Skate Park. You can see here the site location along San Pablo. Again, you'll note that to the west is the Joseph Emery Skate Park, and then you can also note there are a mix of commercial and personal service uses along San Pablo Avenue, as well as the Emeryville Senior Apartments across the street. To take a little bit of a closer look, the site is made up of 2 parcels which are separately owned, and there are 3 commercial buildings and surface parking on the site currently. Just to zoom out for a second, I wanted to just go over the PUD process very quickly. The planned unit development is a means of establishing special zoning for a large development site. And then under the PUD, an applicant will develop a preliminary development plan, which describes in general terms the overall development of the PUD. So thinking about the size, location, and type of uses throughout that development, as well as the phasing. And then finally, the final development plan is a much more detailed plan for an individual development phase of the PUD and the PDP. So that's basically the design review portion of the project. PUDs and PDPs are approved by City Council, and as this project is an amendment to the PDP, you will be making a recommendation for this to be approved by Council. And then a little background on the Promenade Center as a project. It's got a very complicated history. It's several stacks of amendments on top of each other. So in 1995, Kaiser proposed a planned unit development for a large 21-acre medical campus that spanned across Pixar and Promenade today. In 1998, or by 1998, Kaiser had not gone forward with this development, and Pixar then amended a portion of this original Kaiser project to create its current campus. And in that same year, a development group called Castle Group amended the remaining 5 acres of that original Kaiser project to allow mixed use and commercial and residential. At the time, that project was known as Emeryville. And then in 1999, Castle Group amended that project again to expand the amount of commercial and residential square footage allowed. And then the name was changed to Promenade Center. So you may see those names used interchangeably at times throughout the documentation. And then in 2000, the final development plans for that project, Promenade Center, were approved by City Council. So this is the final development plan that was approved for Promenade Center. You can see along San Pablo Avenue, those 3 retail buildings and the surface parking. And then you can see that the residential was proposed for the back. That residential portion has now, part of it has been absorbed by Pixar as part of their parking lot. And then the other portion is now the Emery skate park. The retail portion is fully built out. There are approximately 147 surface parking spaces in 3 commercial buildings, including the CVS pharmacy at 4345 San Pablo. This is almost a 20,000 square foot building. It is vacant as of early this year, and it has had some ongoing graffiti issues. So the property owner had worked with the Bay Area Mural Project to install a mural along the site to try to prevent some of those graffiti. And if you've walked past anytime recently, you'll see that has not been an effective solution. So for this particular project, the applicant, Evergreen Devco, is looking to re-tenant that CVS pharmacy building with a Planet Fitness gym. The gym would be open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It would have approximately 15 employees, and then throughout that 24-hour day, approximately 750 visitors. That building is sited very close to an AC transit stop along San Pablo, and they do intend to keep that corner door facing San Pablo as the main entrance. So you can see they have provided kind of an approximate plan of the interior and have indicated they are going to be keeping that main door. So the proposed amendments to the Promenade Center PUD, PDP are as follows. So condition of approval 7A lists the commercial use types that are permitted in the retail portion of the Promenade Center, and they restrict those hours of operation to 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. So Planet Fitness obviously does not meet those required hours of operation, and it qualifies as a commercial recreation, indoor sports and recreation use type. So this is a commercial use that is of similar intensity to all of the commercial uses already listed in the conditions of approval, but it is not one that was specifically outlined. I will also note that this project that you're contemplating today does not consider any exterior modifications designed to the CVS building as part of re-tenanting it for Planet Fitness. If there are any major exterior modifications, those would be considered under an amended or new final development plan. So that would be a separate process. So this is the amended language for condition of approval 7A. So you can see we've added commercial recreation as a use, and we've struck the restriction on operation hours. That restriction on operation hours will still apply to food and drink businesses, so restaurants will still have hours between 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. at the earliest and latest. And then to go quickly through the findings, in order to recommend this to City Council, the Planning Commission must find that the amended PDP conforms with the general plan, that it provides cohesive, integrated, well-planned development, which contributes to general well-being, that the project site is suitable for the uses permitted, that is compatible with and not detrimental to neighborhood character, availability of civic facilities, surrounding streets, physical safety, and amount of light, that the project site will be graded and developed with due regard for aesthetic quality and landscaping, that it allows originality which does not have significant adverse impacts, and that it is designed to include open space, parking areas, pedestrian walks, signs, illumination, and landscaping. Staff believes that these findings can be made, and you can refer to the longer discussion in the staff report. In terms of environmental review, the Promenade Center was analyzed by a mitigated negative declaration that was adopted by City Council in 1999. CEQA Section 21166 provides that once an EIR or a negative declaration has been adopted, no subsequent or supplemental EIR is required unless there are substantial changes to the project, substantial changes with respect to circumstances, or new information of substantial importance. The amendment does not represent a substantial change. It simply confirms that a certain type of commercial use is permitted where other commercial uses of similar intensity are already permitted. So we do recommend that Planning Commission adopt the resolution recommending that City Council approve the proposed amendment to the Promenade Center Retail Mixed-Use Project, PDP, and its conditions of approval. I'm available for questions, and Luke Capon from Evergreen DevCo, representing the applicant, is also available.
Thank you for your presentation. Do any commissioners have clarifying questions? And I remind you to hold opinions and suggestions till later, but clarifying questions now. Commissioner Hemme?
Yes. Can you clarify this limitation on hours for food and drink? Is that already included in the current?
So that is condition of approval 7B, which lists types of food and drink retail uses allowed, and also includes a qualification about hours limited. So we will not be revising that.
Okay. And I assume there'll be a sign submission. Is that will be handled later then? Is a sign review?
That will be handled later, and whether it comes to you is dependent on the scale of signage that they propose.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, you do? Oh, go ahead, please, Commissioner Ming.
I saw in the condition of approval, it was mentioned about the residential building will be substantial complete after the retail, 1 year after the retail substantial complete. Could you talk about the status of the residential portion?
So the residential portion of the project has not been developed and will not be developed in the future. That portion of the project is now part of Pixar, and it's also the Emery skate park. So it's not going to happen.
Okay.
Okay, any others? Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have anything to present?
They do not.
No? Okay, given that, then, I think we open up the, public hearing at this point. We'll open the public hearing at 6:50, and if there are any members of the public wishing to address the commission on this matter, you have 3 minutes to do so, and we don't have anybody in the room for that. Do we have anybody online?
I have no raised hands, and I've received no speaker cards.
Okay, the public hearing is closed at 6:50, and now we'll bring this back to the commission for deliberation. Do any commissioners have comments to make on this?
Yes. So I'm generally supportive. I just, the question is about the 24-hour use, whether there's any precedent set by this use that would affect city determinations on other sites.
Excuse me. Since I have worked in Emeryville, we have not imposed any hours of operation on any businesses. In this particular case, because there was a residential development right on top, I think, and at that time, this is back in 1999 as well, at that time, probably due to extra precaution, they decided to impose these hours. But if you look at subsequent PUDs, including Bay Street, there are no restrictions on hours of operation. Having said that, I don't believe we have any business, commercial business, open to the public that is 24/7 at this time.
So I guess the question is, then in your interpretation, this would not be any precedent setting, would not have potentially any negative impacts on any future projects.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner,
I believe the Denny's is open 24/7. That's the other side of town. I keep some late hours sometimes, so that's the only place to go in Emeryville.
That is correct. And that Denny's does not have a use permit. It's been there forever. And we have tried in the past to impose some hours on that, but they have never come for any kind of a permit. So that's...
Am I understanding correctly that then if this is approved, these hours are going to apply to the gym only? The restricted hours are still going to apply to the restaurants in that line?
So the restaurants are in a separate condition for approval, and they have a condition for the operating hours. So the restaurants will continue to operate the hours that they're operating and not be subject to this 24/7.
So if we don't have these restrictions elsewhere, those are going to remain? I know that's not exactly what we're looking at right now, but it seems like because of some residential that's no longer going to be built, they have hours of restriction that perhaps some of those businesses would like to be open till 11 or something like that. I don't know.
We have not entertained any requests so far by the restaurants. So I have,
Okay. Yeah, I personally don't see any problem having a 24-hour gym in this location. It seems like a perfectly good place. In fact, I think that it would probably be a benefit to have a little bit more commercial activity going on during those hours. And I really like that the entrance is going to move back to the corner. That's really nice. Those are all my comments.
Commissioner Ming?
Yeah, I'm also support for the 24 hours. I think it's very nice to provide people the flexibility to work out time. I have friends always like to work out at 11 p.m. And also I have other friends who live in Oakland that they would love to go to a nice larger gym, and some of them go to the City Sports Club, which is just along the San Pablo Avenue, but it's part of Berkeley. I think it's very nice to have the gym here. It's kind of like a very nice community interaction space.
Yes, I also support the project because street activation in general is important, and clearly this is a good use for it's frankly, it's fortunate to be able to find use that occupies such a large box, and I think the 24 hours is actually good in the sense of having people on that street.
Thank you. Yes, and I concur. I think that, especially given the problems that commercial storefront retail has these days, I don't see a lot of other opportunities to make this active, so I am supportive of it as well, and I think that it could also invigorate some of the other businesses in the area with increased activity. So, do we have a motion?
Could I just add, even though we've all made supportive comments so far, that having like recently gone shopping for a full service indoor gym in the area, I know that this is dropping in a radius where you have to go a ways. So I think that it is actually a pretty opportune location, and of course it brings it into Emeryville. So
yeah. Okay, that's good. So generally a very nice consensus. So do we have a motion to pass what was submitted to us?
Sure, so moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
seconded.
Okay, can we have a vote?
Yes, on the motion by Commissioner Henme, seconded by Commissioner Wax, to recommend that the City Council approve the amendment to the Promenade Center PUD. Commissioner Chafe is absent. Commissioner Henme?
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez is recused. Commissioner Ming?
Aye.
Commissioner Wax?
Aye.
Vice Chair Dram is absent. And Chair Gizzoni.
Aye.
Motion passes. And this will be heading to the City Council tentatively November 21st for first reading and review.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will now move on to the next item in which we don't have any recusals, and that is objective standards, item 8.2. And I think we have any conflicts of interest on this? No? Okay, so I believe we have a staff presentation for this.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, Commission. And tonight, actually, Jane Iceberg, who's been working on this project as a project consultant this entire past 3 years, will be providing the presentation remotely, and I will chime in during certain portions of it. And of course, they're both here remotely to answer any questions, as am I, and really excited to be before you tonight. It's our third time before you tonight about this topic. Lots of committee meetings going into this as well, so it's exciting to be here. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. This is Jean Iceberg with Lexington Planning. So tonight, as Navarre mentioned, we are talking about objective standards and the revised design guidelines. This is an action hearing, and we're going to provide an update on what's happened with the project since your study session in June. So I'm just going to recap a quick overview of the project, the applicability of these standards and guidelines, and then explain the revisions that have happened since the study session in response to the Planning Commission's feedback and the City Council's feedback. And so we're going to talk about both the citywide design guidelines and revisions to Title IX planning regulations. So this project came about as a result of the city obtaining a grant from Senate Bill 2, which funds projects that streamline housing approvals and increase housing production. And so the city requested a grant to develop objective standards, and these objective standards would help ensure that the city can continue to facilitate high quality design, public improvements, amenities for residential uses, even as projects are going through streamlined or ministerial review. And so the project aims to simplify standards, clarify objective standards, and procedural requirements for staff, for decision makers, for applicants, and for architects. And in this way, this helps the city comply with recent changes in state law, which for certain types of housing projects that are undergoing streamlined review, limits the city's ability to use discretionary or subjective criteria, like in the design guidelines, for certain types of housing projects. So the way it is now, the city has design guidelines. These are generally subjective criteria, encouraging or identifying design intent and identifying the city's design priorities, but these are not regulations in the way of objective standards. And so the city has a number of objective standards already in the planning regulations. When you think of development standards, setbacks, and floor area ratio and density standards. And so this project aims to create new design standards to define the threshold for what is objective. And so the combination of these standards and guidelines will be used for a range of projects throughout the city, as I'll talk a little bit more about. And so we can break these generally into two categories. We have standards and guidelines that address the site and the relationship to the public realm. So that includes the orientation of a building, the streetscape, landscaped area outside of the building, and then building design standards, including amenities within a residential building. So the design guidelines were originally created in 2010. This was on the heels of the city's general plan update, and they established design intent. They described the city's design priorities. And so a key change here was to remove guidelines that were redundant, to move any objective standards that were within the guidelines into the planning regulation, overall to streamline the content. It's about 2/3 of the size as the original guidelines. So it removes elements that have been completed or are no longer necessary. One thing that remains the same is the applicability. So these guidelines can be used to review discretionary projects, non-residential projects, so all different types of uses, building types, different contexts such as adjacencies to freeways or railroad tracks. And then they also now illustrate just a successful example of design. The previous iteration of the design guidelines show both undesirable and desirable examples. There's been a lot of development in the city in the last 13 years. And so now the guidelines we're proposing are really to highlight those successful examples. So key changes since you reviewed this in June, continued to refine the guidelines to remove those redundancies, things that were addressed in other regulations, whether it's district level plans like the Park Avenue District Plan or the planning regulations. You'll see some updated graphics, and again, those changes in the photo examples really focusing on the positive aspects of design, successful examples of design. Just some changes to maps to make corrections for things that have changed in the last 13 years. And then you'll see an attachment for an updated matrix of the specific changes that were made to the guidelines. So moving on to the planning regulations, these amendments cover a range of different sections within the planning regulations. So when we think of design standards, you'll see a lot of communities in the region are adopting design standards, and they're very focused on building standards. I would say this series of amendments less focused on building articulation, but there are a couple standards you can see on the screen here that we talked about last time. Family-friendly unit design, a lot of those standards moved out of the design guidelines into the planning regulations because they are measurable standards. Most of the time, characterized as a menu of options. So there are options for different ways that architects and applicants can comply with those standards. There's residential amenity standards, new bike parking standards, utility standards, specifically some references to handouts, things that change from time to time, stormwater guidance, discards plans for trash collection, things like that that don't necessarily need to be in the code, but can be on the city's website. And so the code now makes reference to those materials. A number of standards addressing public improvements. So again, that relationship to the public realm, the streetscape, sidewalks, specific sidewalks dimensions have again moved out of the design guidelines and into the planning regulations. And then several process changes that you may recall we talked about last time. So an objective design review process that matches these new objective standards and will be used by projects undergoing streamlined review. And then lastly, some new illustrative graphics that convey what the standard means. So in terms of applicability, in general, these standards apply to all residential and residential mixed-use projects. But for certain types of multifamily projects that are using some of the state streamlining bills, when we think about SB 35, which is typically for affordable projects, AB 2162, which is supportive housing for example, for formerly homeless. These projects that are ministerial approval only need to meet objective standards. So those are the criteria on which the city can review and take action on those types of projects. Some of the standards only apply to projects with 10 or more units. The idea being we don't want to burden projects that have fewer than 10 units. And so you'll see certain types of amenities, other sort of add-on standards only apply when you have a mid to larger size project. And then some of the new standards apply to all projects, including non-residential projects. So for example, there's a new section on open space requirements that really implements the general plan's guidelines about new park locations throughout the city. So just to highlight a few changes since the last review, in terms of building design standards, you'll see some changes to graphics in the family-friendly section, changes to the bonus criteria for future-proofing garages that are part of projects, revisions to the articulation standards based on the Commission's feedback, the addition of a standard around requiring double pane windows, the discard collection plan handout that I mentioned is now part of your packet, and then a few changes to residential amenity requirements in response to the Commission and City Council feedback regarding the size of pet amenities, requirements for wiring for security cameras, and then secure mail rooms within residential buildings. In terms of public improvements, a couple key changes. One, to not allow curb cuts on a few different streets, but the one that was added was on Shell Mound. And then revision to the transportation demand management requirements around requiring at least one transit pass per unit to allow some flexibility because those AC Transit and Clipper card programs do change with some frequency. So the last slide, I'm going to pass back to Navar about the demolition ordinance changes.
So the demolition ordinance, in addition to what you received in the original packet, you received a memo stating there's some additional changes because the scope of modifications that was needed was a little bit larger to really fully encompass everything that we needed to address. So it's not actually called the demolition ordinance, it's the preservation of structures ordinance. And how it's currently written, it goes back and forth between significant structures and residential. So it's kind of a confusing format. It's not very user-friendly. So we're like, well, we're doing this. Let's make this easier to read. So we separated that out. We also changed the process. So it's now preservation permits that are issued instead of a conditional use permit because it's not a use, it's a demolition. So that needs to be a type of permit, not a conditional use permit. It's not a use, right? Then we added a requirement per the suggestion of council to that whenever there's a demolition of a residential structure that it needs to be demonstrated that it's more expensive to rehabilitate that than to demolish it. And then, so we put that in there. It also now includes reference to State Code Section 66300, which protects naturally occurring affordable housing. But we also added an additional category for our own code that's not captured in the state section, and that's for naturally occurring affordable housing that's below fair market rent. So that would be an example would be if you had a rental unit that was below fair market for whatever reason. Maybe the person living there has lived there for a long time and the landlord just hasn't raised rent. There could be many reasons for that. The person living there may or may not be low income, but the rent itself is below fair market. So that addition captures something that's not in the state code. So those are some of the changes those are most of the changes that we made to really fully encompass the situation. We also made sure that the review was done by community development director for the preservation of significant structures, because that's just preserving it. Where an example of how that we're made it clear that that's how it works, because it's a little confusingly stated in the current code. So the Pelco building down here at the bottom of Park Avenue, that was done on staff level, and that was a preservation. It was not a demolition of that structure. So it was just making it clear for that. Also, we made it clear and then restructured. If someone comes in for a demolition, it's because it's an emergency situation, basically. There's an environmental situation, there's an earthquake, or there's toxins or something, that can be approved by the community development director, but they need to sign an agreement that they will come back to city council for approval of a project within 9 months. So a little bit of time to develop a replacement plan, but to make sure that that demolition can happen if there's an urgent need. So other than that, it's approved by city council in these situations. So both Jean and I are here for any questions you may have. And again, I misspoke earlier. We've had 3 study sessions, and now we're here for the 4th time. So again, thank you for all your work on this.
Okay, so is that the full presentation? Okay, well, thank you for the presentation. Are there any clarifying questions from commissioners?
Yes. Is it possible to make minor refinements, amendments to this proposal tonight? Okay.
Absolutely.
Should I bring up those points now, or do you want to?
That's a point of clarification, yes. Now would
Okay.
be the time.
So on page 66, this is under the bikes, and this is about bikes, about bike rooms being on an upper floor. And it says that if it's on an upper floor, the elevator needs to be large enough to provide a large bike space. And what I'm wondering is, if there were a small bike room on the ground floor with that allowed space for the large bike room, then couldn't there be an elevator that would be more of a standard elevator would that allow a standard bike? And the reason I bring this up is because I've worked on projects like this, and bike rooms on ground floors sometimes, I mean, particularly when there are a lot of bikes required by this code. So, and to include a large bike in the project, absolutely, that's great. But a large bike, an elevator that would accommodate a large bike is not going to be a standard elevator. And it essentially would preclude, either you'd have to put in a special elevator, which would be very expensive, or it would preclude having bike rooms on an upper floor. And the reason it's really desirable to have it on upper floor is because a lot of times ground floor space is valuable. And you don't have enough space to put in the giant bike room on the ground floor. And so if you could put in a small bike room on the ground floor that accommodates the large bikes, then couldn't you have a standard elevator, standard bike on upper floors? So I'm wondering, I have some language. Should I keep going? I have a few other concerns. Or how do you want to handle this? So my proposed amendment was something like, or if large bicycle parking is provided on the ground floor and other standard bicycle parking spaces are provided on the upper floor, then an elevator shall be provided to accommodate a standard bicycle.
I think if it's a proposed amendment, that's not really a clarifying question. So
Well, that's
do
what I
we
was
want to?
asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we might want to hold that for a little later.
Okay.
So, but do you have other clarifying questions?
No.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you. I just had a broad question. I understand this might be our maybe 8th public meeting on this topic, so I apologize that I haven't kept up with every meeting and every committee that has seen this work. Just wondering if staff could relate to me if there has been any input from the development community and maybe what the broad strokes of that might have been, and if those were incorporated into the draft we're looking at.
just answer that question up here because it seems more appropriate. Yeah, at the beginning of the process, we had outreach where we contacted developers, people who were familiar with the planning process in Emeryville, who had used all of our documents to get their feedback on what they thought was working and not working, what needed improvement, what they wanted to have kept. And so that was the initial, very beginning process, like making sure that that was captured up front. That was like our baseline, actually. Yeah.
Any other clarifying questions? Commissioner Meng?
I have a question regarding the significant structures. Is that the city already has a list of all the buildings are identified as structural?
Yes, we do.
Okay, any others? Commissioner Wax?
How when it mentions design quality, how does that work within objective standards? How do we measure that?
That's a great question. Yeah, design quality is, Gina, I don't know if you want to answer that more thoroughly than me or in addition to me. Is there a specific instance that you're referring to?
Well, it's listed. It's listed in here for I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of it. The preservation permit. One of the city council findings that has to be found in 9-5 1205 A2.
Yeah.
The replacement structure would feature design quality that is as high or higher than the structure to be demolished.
Yes. So I'm scrolling to that. Sorry. So that's why I'm taking a moment. A2, I believe, is for significant structures, not residential units. Is that correct? Yes.
If I may, for
Yes.
clarification, in this particular instance, the design quality is not subject to objective standards. It needs to go to the council. To that extent, the design quality as outlined in our design review guidelines would need to be followed in order to ensure that that criteria is met. So basically, if a preservation permit or a demolition permit is going to the city council, then that itself is a discretionary permit and does not need to be objective, and therefore you can make the findings.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just jump in one more to just kind of add to what Miru accurately said. There is you'll recall from Navarre's presentation that some of these items were cleanup items and not necessarily related to implementing state law requiring, new design standards to be objective standards. And the demolition preservation permit section is not a design standard section, right? It's a kind of a separate cleanup item that's sort of dovetailed from staff's review of the objective standards. So it doesn't have the design quality thing. That's a good catch and a good eye, but that section does not have to be objective.
Okay, I had a sense it would be something like that. Thanks.
We did consider, now that I'm looking at it, I had to catch up with you. We did consider that, and we felt that because this was, as they said, not about the objective standards, it should stay there, but we did take out the compatible with character of the neighborhood element of that, just because it has a loaded history to it.
None? Oh, Commissioner Martinez?
Thank you again for the presentation. Just wondering what the process is if we do have changes to these guidelines in the future. Commissioner Ming and I had the opportunity to go to a planning webinar a couple of weeks ago where I was put into a breakout room with a planning commissioner from another city that's a little bit ahead of us on the process, and they described their experience of this document as being a living one that they were open to making changes to in the future when they discovered when things work or don't work. So just wondering what the process would be for changes to come up to this document in the future. Would it be when an applicant is unable to meet a guideline requirement, or is there a regular schedule where the commission and or the city council would be looking at this again with any regularity?
Yeah, that question's come up. So I feel like I'm going to go back to the. I'm looking around the speakers, and it's just kind of weird. Okay, so this question has come up in a couple different ways so far, and we could formalize something if you wanted to. I will say that we have a couple opportunities that are coming up systematically anyway. So when you say this document, it's entire planning regulations, so it's rather broad. We do have our annual general plan and housing element report, and I would say that this can be folded into that to a certain capacity. We also have, because of the housing element, a lot of visiting of the planning regulations coming to you over the next year or two, where we're going to really be looking at some things very deeply based on the programs and that housing element. I think there's, outside of that, staff can always come to you, or you can always request specific review. We definitely don't want to be doing it in real time with an application, right? That is not what we want. But we can see, like, for example, staff always keeps a running list of changes that need to be made, and a lot of them are like, that just could have been stated more clearly, or like, oh, that left a question mark. Let's remove the question mark from that situation. And those type of things happen not infrequently, right? And so we could come for regular cleanups on that sort of thing, I believe. But we haven't been like, oh, every October we're going to come to Planning Commission. We haven't said something like that, or you have not provided that direction yet. Sure.
Okay, I do have one question for the objective standards memo that came out yesterday. On page 5, under the section B, residential units, demolition, the city council may authorize demolition of residential units in the following situations, and it goes down to under paren 1AI. Says the applicant will provide at least the same number of residential units as the demolished structure, either on-site or elsewhere within the city of Emeryville. And I was curious as to what sort of situations would elsewhere come up with. And I was looking around in the documentation. I didn't see any restrictions on what might happen to subsequently to the point that housing was demolished but not replaced there. Is there anything in the space that says what happens if a developer knocks something down on site A and says I'm building the housing on site B? Is there any restriction on what they can do with site A after that?
Right. Well, it does require city council approval, right? So they have to review why this is happening and approve why the demolition is happening in the new proposed development, right? That is continued from the current planning regulations. My understanding and my logical extrapolation of when this could apply is if you have a site that's multiple parcels, or if you have a site where someone wants to develop a parcel here, they maybe own it, and the other one next door is minimally developed or not developed, and then you want to just kind of shift a little bit around. Like, a lot of development projects have multiple parcels, so we're just kind of trying to allow for flexibility in that. It's not really foreseen that someone will have a development on one side of the town and try and build on the other. That seems much less likely to me. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still thinking it through because it's something where suddenly I can see where it gives flexibility, but I can also see where this easily slips out of what you call objective. Suddenly it's really subjective. Is it okay to build this here and do that? And it just seems like it gets a little slippery to me. And I was just wondering, I wasn't able to see if there was anything elsewhere in the regulations.
So again, this is not the portion of objective standards. This is still a cleanup of the preservation ordinance, which will go to the city council. So this is not under the objective standards change.
Okay, so
this
it's
is
outside
under
of
the
that.
cleanup of the regulations change.
Got it. Thank you.
I also want to clarify, to my knowledge, and if other staff have other experience, I don't think this has come up in an issue ever.
That is correct.
It's never been problematic. So that's always a little bit reassuring to me. Like, so far, so good, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Okay, then I think we go into the opportunity for public comment. And so this opens the public hearing at 7:25. If we have any speakers, you are restricted to 3 minutes each. It looks like we don't have any in the room. Do we have any online?
We do not.
Okay, this closes the public hearing at 7:25, and the public hearing is closed at this time. So we'll now bring the deliberation back to the commission, and I'll just open this up to whatever commissioners might have to say about this. I'll start with Commissioner Wax.
The primary thing I want to do is actually just respond real quickly to Commissioner Henme's question, which is that I can tell you that literally every time I see a residential project come before the BPAC, there are members asking for elevators big enough to bring big bikes in. It is a favorite topic of theirs, partly because a lot of bicycle owners want to be able to take their bikes to their units, and this is a problem they experience. I don't have one of those bikes, so all I can tell you, as is common on bicycle issues that come up at the BPAC, is that's what they want.
You're saying large bicycles, not standard bicycles?
Large bicycles, yeah.
Because,
well, they're
yeah,
very expensive. The big cargo bikes are real expensive.
Because elevators don't accommodate those. A standard elevator does not accommodate those cargo bikes. That's why the questions come up. But it also means that probably almost nobody will ever build a building with an elevator that will accommodate a cargo bike, because it's such a large elevator that you wouldn't do it unless you were forced to in some kind of way.
Commissioner Chave?
No comments, thank you.
Commissioner Henme?
Well, I'd like to offer an amendment. So this is to page 66, and you see there item D. And it says bicycle parking shall be located on the ground floor, which of course is preferable, unless a ramp that is at least 6 feet wide is provided, or an elevator is provided that is large enough to accommodate a large bicycle. I think that's all fine. But what I'd like to add is a line that, or if large bicycle parking is provided on the ground floor and other standard bicycle parking spaces are provided on the upper floors, then an elevator shall be provided to accommodate a standard bicycle, which would allow the inclusion of the large bicycles but allow standard elevators to be used, and frankly, to allow this solution of bicycle rooms on an upper floor to be possible, because I basically think it's not possible if you require the cargo bicycle size elevators. I can tell you the elevators that we use for affordable housing, market rate housing, they're not, that this is the size that we're going to use. And it is really good to offer architects the option to have bicycle parking spaces on upper floors, because as I mentioned, ground floor space is sometimes really tight and really valuable. And, you have 1,000 square feet for a big bike room. Well, then an option would be to have a smaller bike room down, have more parking or more retail or bigger lobby or other spaces like that, and then put some bicycle rooms on upper floors, which I've heard people like because it's on the same floor as where they live. And so that would allow this option to happen. If you leave it as it is now, you basically won't have the option to have bike rooms on upper floors.
Commissioner Martinez?
I don't have any comments. I may I just ask Commissioner Henme to please repeat your amendment, just so I can, it sinks in
it
for
would
me.
add to the end of that line, or if large bicycle parking is provided on the ground floor, so that they accommodating the cargo bikes, and other standard bicycle parking spaces are provided on the upper floors, then an elevator shall be provided to accommodate a standard bicycle. So in other words, the elevator size for standard bicycles, if standard bicycle parking is on the upper floors and the cargo bikes are down.
Okay. Do you have anything beyond that, Commissioner Martinez? No? Commissioner Ming?
No comments.
Okay, and I also don't have comments. It is a lot of material, and I do think that Commissioner Martinez' interest in whether or not this is a living document and how it is maintained is vital, because I think this is sufficiently large that we're going to see unplanned interactions, and we'll see how things happen. So I think that's essential, that over time this is something that staff revisits. My understanding is that staff regularly reviews these things and sees how these rules play out. And so while I was at one point thinking about asking for a formal mechanism to be put on top of this, I think if that's already happening, then that would just be creating redundancy that gets in the way. So I don't really advocate for that at this point. So, Commissioner Chafe?
Can I respond to Commissioner Henry's amendment?
Please.
So just a couple of things to keep in mind with the cargo bike versus other bike issue. I think a few things to think about. Number one, a lot of cargo bikes are electric bikes. So the bike parking for cargo bikes would absolutely have to accommodate charging. And there would have to be a secure place to keep chargers in order to make that work. And it's really important. The sort of unintended situation that I could see developing, which would not be ideal, is that the space for cargo bikes becomes really small and isolated, and therefore is put into a non-ideal location because it's not serving all of the bicyclists in the building. And so I think we want to protect against that happening. It needs to be really secure, as someone else mentioned. They're very valuable bikes, prone to theft. And they also are really heavy, so they have to be able to be maneuvered in and out easily, ideally with a straight line of travel. So, you know, I see where you're coming from. I do think the preferable solution is to accommodate with an elevator if we're going to consider that all bikes would need an elevator, or, you know, to give that flexibility of having a bike room and a bike space on one floor or another. But I do think there is a way that we could probably find language that, you know, we just want to make sure we cover the bases. Imagine someone coming in with a full load of groceries with a child on the bicycle. It just needs to be a space that's really flexible enough to accommodate those sorts of needs with a heavy bicycle.
And so the location of the bike room is defined in the code, and it can't be in the corner of the building or whatever. That's clear, and it has to, I forget the exact language, but it's close to the entry, and it's got to be easily accessible from the entry, and there's a bunch of language about that. And the code requires charging in bike rooms, so that all would be covered.
Yeah.
So it would be, you know, the cargo bikes on the ground floor would be well located, would have charging, and would be lockable. That's also required. Yeah. So I think those concerns would be covered. And like I say, if I can assure you, at least for affordable housing, if it requires an elevator for a cargo bike to be provided, it won't happen.
No, it's a really good point, and Chair, if I might respond to that. So, no, I think all those are really good points, and as long as it is tied, it's made clear that that space, even if it is exclusively for one type of bicycle, needs to meet all of those requirements, then that makes sense to me, and I think it's a good point that you've made.
Okay, is there any further discussion? I mean, I feel like that's a point that, do we want more
I
clarification?
had another point to bring up, but do we want to finish this discussion, or How do you wish to handle this?
I think I just want to find out, I guess, before we move on to your next point, if there's anybody who has further input on this point, because I want to not leave it ambiguous, because it did seem.
Right.
Do you feel like things are, okay?
I mean, I've proposed it as an amendment. I guess I'm assuming it takes a second of that amendment for it to move ahead.
Yeah, but I think if we're clear on that and people know where they stand on that, then we can probably move forward to your next point.
You can do all the amendments in one motion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, everything
Right.
can come in one motion, but
Okay.
you may want to just, kind
a
of
good
check.
point.
We'll check consensus
So
at the
the
end.
other concern that I noted, and I appreciate that it would have been better if this came up earlier. So I'm sorry about that, but sometimes you do. So page 80 is on pedestrian orientation of units. And, sorry, I'm getting to it. Okay, 79, 80, page 80, pedestrian access, 9-4.703, residential units. And it says, where units can only be accessed from the interior of a site. Okay, so that means that it's not from a sidewalk. Well, wait a minute. Where units can only be accessed from the interior of a site, a pedestrian walkway shall connect to a public sidewalk. Entrances facing a public right-of-way shall have this protection with common depth, minimum search or porch or stoop that complies with okay. So the concern is that this sounds like, and maybe I'm wrong, in which case planning staff can clarify, does this require ground floor units to have outdoor access?
Maybe I can respond. So this is just about pedestrian access. There are other requirements that require outdoor space on a per unit basis. What this was really trying to get at are maybe, Emeryville of the past has more of a townhome configuration that has pedestrian walkways within a site that then connects to the sidewalk. So the idea is that you're not walking down a drive aisle, like a parking access drive aisle, but that there is sidewalk access to the units. That was the idea behind this particular paragraph.
Well, it does say the front doors of exterior ground floor residential dwelling units, and let's leave out live work, adjacent to a public right-of-way shall be oriented to the public sidewalk. Does that mean that every ground floor unit has to have an exterior door and it's connected to the public sidewalk? It doesn't say that, but it implies it. In other words, do all ground floor units have to have exterior doors, number one, and connected to a public sidewalk?
This could also be a shared entry. So it could be a ground floor unit that would be, it's either a recess, a porch, or a stoop, but it could also be a shared entry, in which case it's, more of a portico, a recess, shared lobby kind of entrance.
So ground floor units don't have to have their own private exterior doors?
No, there could be a shared entrance to a multifamily building or townhomes with individual unit entries.
Okay. It's a little unclear. I would not want a code that would require every ground floor unit to have an exterior door and an entry because, for example, I can tell you two building types that one would be senior housing and two would be supportive housing, where I can tell you that our developers do not want exterior doors for to those units. In the case of supportive housing, they would prohibit it because they want everybody to be coming through one entry point and be controlling how people come in and out of units. And they don't want, for example, guests to be able to come in, sneak into the unit, and have more people living in the unit than are registered for the unit. So they actually prohibit that. So, and senior housing is for safety reasons. And if that's if that's not required, then I'm fine. But I just
I
want
think we can clarify that.
Okay.
I see your point. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I guess the only other point I'd raise, which I think, I understand why that's under the appliances, under the family-friendly appliances, and that's page 101. Requiring a washer and dryer in every unit that's 2 bedrooms or larger is for affordable housing an expense. That's usually not done. It's for a couple reasons. One is the expense. 2 is the service. That when you have a washer dryer in every unit, it means that you have a lot of machines that you have to service, and it means more maintenance cost. And there's actually, it's less convenient to have a shared laundry, but it's also a social activity. People oftentimes meet together in the laundries, and we connect them to the play areas and stuff. And so there are actually some good reasons for shared laundries, but anyway, I wouldn't push that. But frankly, I think for affordable housing developments, that's a push. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to respond to both of your items. One for the residential use of the front doors. I thought it was clear in reading it, but I'm hearing that it's not. But when I read that part, it says the front doors of exterior ground floor residential dwelling units adjacent to the public right-of-way. So if the front doors are adjacent to the public right-of-way, it's not mandating that they are. It's saying that.
Well, but it sounds like you want front doors on exterior ground floor residential units. That's what's ambiguous.
Right, to the extent feasible, right. I could see, yeah, I'm not arguing
Sort of
with
like
it could be
if there
clear.
were front doors, or
Yeah,
something.
Yeah, but the
Okay.
intent was not mandated, but
Okay.
In regards to the laundry, yes, that's something that staff is absolutely aware of. And at the same time, we have been getting applications for ADUs for multi-unit residential buildings that are existing because they've removed the laundry rooms to put laundry in individual units because that is what is desired by the market. So if an affordable project were to come in, they could get an exception or a waiver for having the laundry in each unit, saying that it's either financially infeasible or that it would reduce the overall number of units that they'd be able to provide. Either of those cases are provided under affordable housing law by the state. So we thought that was okay to keep it in here because there's that provision for affordable housing, but at the same time, it would show the intent of the city to have laundry easily accessible for all units, and then market rate wouldn't be required to have it, and that's the direction they're going anyway.
Are you saying they'd use a concession then in order to,
Correct, a concession or a waiver depending on
or a waiver? I see.
depending on the circumstance for them, right?
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anything further? Oh, okay, we can then have a motion if anybody has one. Do you have one with your amendments?
Well, I move to amend, sorry, I don't have the page right now.
Hang on, are we still, I just want to make sure have we hit everybody's comments, and we're still in discussion mode and we're forming a motion now? Okay.
I believe so, if people are done with discussion.
Okay. Maybe it would be easier if we have staff read back what we think? Or we're not
Would
prepared to
it
do
be
that?
a motion for the whole thing to be approved with an amendment, or rather
With
first to
with
do
the
an
following
amendment?
list of amendments?
It would be a motion to recommend to the city council to approve the item with the amendment that you outlined regarding the bike elevator sizing. I can rephrase it if we need to, but we've written it down. And clarification around the exterior door pedestrian access requirement. And those were the two I heard that sort of consensus on. I don't know if there's any others, so correct me if that's incorrect.
Okay, with that clarification.
Before we vote on that, I'd actually like to ask a couple of questions
Sure.
related to that amendment. Do we know, because of course this is a subject that's come up before with the cargo bikes fitting in elevators, what size of elevator are we talking about?
We intentionally did not provide dimensions in that section of the code, leaving it up to the applicant to demonstrate, because in trying to do research for elevators, it was incredibly time intensive, and we realized it can be demonstrated at the time of the project being built. It does not need to be written directly into the code, the exact dimensions.
The dimension of elevators are usually set by the stretcher size requirement. So there's a diagonal stretcher size, but basically the elevators are approximately about 5 deep and 8 wide, something like that. I mean, you can, a standard bike fits in fairly easily going diagonally across. Actually, you can almost turn it probably parallel to the elevator. But that's about the dimension that it is, and that's pretty much, everybody uses this same size elevator, unless there's some kind of unusual circumstance.
So in staff's research on the subject, looking at standard-ish elevator sizes that are larger than the ones that we usually get, did this appear to be something that was reasonable?
If it was reasonable to require a larger elevator?
In your research, did you find elevator sizes that would seem reasonable to ask someone to install that would accommodate such a bike, even if you're not specifically saying it has to be these dimensions?
Well, reasonable is very subjective. I think it was clear from BPAC and Transportation Committee that this was a priority to be in the code, and that the root issue was if you decided to have the bike parking on the upper floors, could you actually get the bikes that was designed to be parked there? To that extent, it was discussed, and just tell me if I'm just speaking too much about this, but it was decided that, yes, it was kind of a deterrent to require an elevator, because it is significantly more expensive without any specific numbers thrown out. Just kind of a generally known thing. It is significantly more expensive to provide larger elevators. So that we need to basically make sure, it was kind of an insurance thing, make sure that if we put in large biking spaces, that it can actually be accessed. So to that extent, I don't think that necessarily having a provision for all the large bicycles being on the ground floor, that would be consistent with the intent that I heard at BPAC and Transportation Committee. As long as we have large bicycle parking spaces, they need to be actually be able to be accessed by those bicycles. So separating it out, I think, is actually a creative solution to that. So does that help answer that question? We did not do in-depth research. There were no memos. It was like, that is not where our time needs to be devoted for this. The direction was quite clear. But with that said, I do think there's room for modification, with knowing that the intent is that all bicycle spaces need to be able to be accessed by the bicycles they're designed to accommodate.
Okay.
Commissioner G.
Thank you. So a follow-up to that one, just to belabor this a little bit more. So we just talked about a situation where we could have a provision in the planning regulations and then an opportunity for affordable housing developments to ask for a concession or a waiver. Is this something that could also apply in this situation? That we leave the language as is, and if it becomes prohibitive, then affordable housing development could apply for a waiver or concession on this item?
They could, and then my question is that bike parking accessible as the intent is?
Yeah.
Right? Now, it's only 1 out of 10 spaces, right? That or in the code. People could always provide more than that, but it's only 1 out of 10 spaces. So if you had, 100 bike parking spaces, you'd only need to provide room for 10 of them on the ground floor, right?
Yeah.
Which I think would probably be more financially feasible than an elevator. I don't know.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that is a creative alternative that was not considered previously during BPAC or Transportation Committee meetings.
You have to remember, it's not only cost, it's space. When we're laying these things out, that the space of an elevator that's not a small thing. And I frankly am rather uncomfortable with the idea that affordable housing developers are having to go through all these different waivers because there's no guarantee. When you don't know, as an architect, you're looking at this code, you don't know that you're going to get that waiver. These are not guaranteed. These are discretionary, and so you probably would say, okay, I might not take that chance, or you also have to, if it's a waiver, you have to have the cost issue, right? You have to have a contractor price this thing out and prove that it's financially infeasible. These are, so it's not just a simple kind of thing. It's a burden.
I concur with you on that, because I think that if you're trying to get to objective standards where people can decide if they're going to be able to develop a project or not, and then you introduce a lot of waivers, then that certainty disappears, and that's pushing in the opposite direction.
In addition to that, as it's been pointed out, it's a lot easier for affordable housing developments to get these waivers. However, if we haven't determined that it seems, from our perspective, to be cost reasonable or whatever other subjective way you want to look at it, then is it a reasonable thing to expect market rate developers to do or have to apply a waiver for? So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do we have further deliberation on that idea, or are people thinking that they're closer to where they want to see if they want to do this with this amendment or not? What is your feeling, Commissioner Hemme?
I'm more curious to see how others
Okay,
feel.
let's see how others feel.
I'm comfortable with moving forward with the amendment as proposed.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to, Chad, read us what you think the amendment would be, and we can take it from there and see if that goes?
Sure. So what you're looking for is a motion to recommend that the City Council approve with the amendment on page 66, Section D, appending the language, or if large bike parking is provided on the ground floor and standard bike parking on upper floors, a standard elevator that accommodates a standard sized bike is required. So that's the amendment. The other is clarification, which we've not wordsmithed, but we understand the intent. Clarification around ground floor units and exterior doors. The intent's not to require an exterior door for every ground floor unit. Did I get it right? Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
Okay. Do we have a motion for that as read?
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Seconded.
Okay.
Undefeated duo tonight. Motion on the motion by Commissioner Hemme, seconded by Commissioner Wax, to recommend that the City Council approve the objective standards as amended, as discussed. I will call the roll. Commissioner Chafe.
Aye.
Commissioner Hemme.
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez.
Aye.
Commissioner Ming.
Aye.
Commissioner Wax.
Aye.
Vice Chair Dram is absent, and Chair Gazzoni.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And that too will go to the city council on November 21st.
Okay, so that closes that out, and we can now move on to planning commissioners' comments. If anybody has any comments, Commissioner Chief.
This is a comment that's directed to two of my colleagues. Commissioner Martinez, you mentioned that you attended that webinar. Could you tell us anything interesting that happened at the webinar, like any takeaways, because I wasn't able to attend?
So thank you for asking that. For me, and we were in different breakout rooms, I think, so we probably got different things out of it, but I was in a breakout room with a member of the Alameda Planning Commission, and as I hinted at, they're far ahead of us in this process. They have a really engaged community, so they had a lot of feedback, I suspect, in person. So we had, I counted 8 meetings listed on our agenda as this has been run through. But I think we've got a city where maybe our residents trust us too a lot with doing the legwork on this process. So I feel like we don't necessarily have the same feedback cycle that they do in other communities, which, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I think for the speed of development and for the purpose of developing objective design standards in order to get more housing made, it's definitely a positive. I think that's been a positive thing in our past. But I think on the other side of that coin, we could run into some unforeseen issues where new developments will come up, and there just might be some things that are hinky. One thing that I've been thinking about, I've been thinking about our design standards in general, and this is outside of that meeting. I don't know if any of you follow Alfred Twu on Twitter, but he's a local architect, and but he recently posted an illustration of a very boxy building but he as opposed to having pardon me, I'm not one of the people on our team who has a lot of architectural experience, but on the massing of a building where there's a lot of delineation with the depth, instead of having that type of articulation, he's proposing more of ornamentation as a possibility for those kinds of standards. And that's something that, if I had been in on all 8 meetings of this process, maybe I would have brought up, and I think that's something maybe we could explore. But I do see these types of standards as a living expression of how we feel about balancing that scale of design standards and just getting people housed, because we're just in a severe place. But I do like that his drawing of the building with ornamentation. There's so many enormous buildings in New York that look like this, and one of them's featured in the popular Hulu show Only Murders in the Building, and known as the Arconia. That's not the real name of the building, but it's a big box with a big square courtyard, and the thing that makes it look beautiful is ornamentation rather than the changing of the massing. But anyway, those are my the takeaway from that webinar, and then just my general thoughts lately on objective standards and my desire for it to be a conversation with the community that is ongoing.
I went in a break room focusing on urban infill, and I think their staff from Urban Design Partner and the ULI, and also there are some planning commissioner from City of Livermore. So in general, we talk about how each city are doing on the affordable housing development, and they also mentioned about this TOC. I need to go back to check what the TOC stands for, but they were talking about this requirement for all the cities in Alameda. So basically break into 3 different parts. I think the first part is new affordable housing developments, and then they have a list of requirements or a list of items each city can choose to comply to of them. And then the next column is talking about affordable housing preservation. So it's not just the new categorized affordable housing, but also it's like the housing unit currently is the price is affordable. And I remember the third part is talking about I think it's regarding renter prevention. But they did send me a PDF, and I can go back to find that and forward to everyone. Or should I send it to Mira first, and then yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I would just have a comment about objective standards because I've worked with them in many cities, and the set of formally oriented objective standards, such as how the building looks and shapes, is relatively minimal in this code that we just recommended, which I think is good, because it many of this, for example, the breaking up the mass every 50 feet. Well, other cities will have it every 20 feet, and then they'll define it much more specifically that you have to have. So, or they might have things about exact kind of a band around the building or things like this. So I'm glad that the earlier commentary before I joined the Planning Commission was about trying not to have everything look the same and tie the hands of the designers and all that. And I congratulate the Planning Commission for its decision not to do that, because I think it does allow for much more variety. In other cities, the way they've written it quite tightly means that the buildings will look much more similar, and so I'm glad it turned out the way it is.
Commissioner Martinez, any comments? Okay, Commissioner Ming? None here either, so we are adjourned at 8:01.